Last year, the Baltimore Ravens led the NFL in rushing attempts and rushing yards, while being top 5 in every other rushing category. Derrick Henry led the NFL last year in rushing attempts and was second in rushing yards. Justice Hill had a career year in rushing attempts, yards, receptions, and receiving yards, and Keaton Mitchell exploded onto the NFL scene as a rookie, showing he could be a top-level threat before going down to injury. But all of that was in 2023, and 2023 is over. This is 2024, and what every Ravens fan has been wondering since Derrick Henry was signed this offseason is, just how good can this team be when running the ball this year? Well, I want to know that too. So let's look at the numbers and get some projections for the running backs of Baltimore. Let's get to it. Welcome in, everyone. This is Jordan with Ravens Flash Report, and the projections for the Ravens running backs in general are going to vary based on what your opinion is of how effective Derrick Henry can be in this offense and how many touches he should get. Many NFL fans and analysts say that Derrick Henry as a workhorse gets better as the game goes and needs a lot of touches for his running style to be effective. That his speed and power combined with his size and battering ram style cause defensive linemen and would-be tacklers to become exhausted by the third and fourth quarter, opening up more opportunities for him. Others say that Derrick Henry with fewer touches and less pressure to be the only threat on the offense could be more effective with fresh legs late in a game when facing defenders who should be tired regardless when facing a Ravens rushing attack by the third or fourth quarter. Basically what I'm saying is there's an argument to be made for both sides. As for where I stand on this, I find myself somewhat in the middle, but admitting that a Derrick Henry with fresh legs late in a game and possibly late in the season could be very beneficial to the Ravens offense. That being said, the reason I'm not completely on this side of the debate is that we paid a significant amount to add Derrick Henry's services to this offense, and not to open wounds, but we saw that the Ravens getting away from one of the most defining qualities of their team has often proven to be detrimental to their game plan and the results of the game in general. Last year, Derrick Henry led the league in rushing attempts with 280. This is the fourth time in 5 years that Derrick Henry has led the league in rushing attempts. For comparison, Gus Edwards and Justice Hill combined for 282 last year. The volume that Derrick Henry has had in attempts just over the past 5 years has been astonishing. On your screen now are the numbers for Henry in various rushing categories over the last 5 seasons, compared to whoever was leading the Ravens in that same category in the same year. This data shows not only the dependency the Titans had on Henry to power not just their run game, but their offense in general, but it also gives strong evidence to great results coming from giving Derrick Henry the ball as often as possible. It also shows that the Ravens, as a team, have operated almost entirely as a running back by committee since Lamar took over as the starter. While we may see that Lamar is the leader in yards every year and most of them in attempts, he's usually not the touchdown leader, and every year multiple Ravens have over 400 or 500 yards. Now, a major part of the argument that can be made for not running Derrick Henry as many times as possible is that he should be able to be as effective with less carries. This would be possible due to the difference between the Ravens and Titans' allowance of yards before contact. Last year, Henry's yards before contact was 2, while Gus Edwards was 2.3. However, Henry's yards after contact was 2.1, while Edwards is at 1.8. If this extra space before contact is granted to Henry combined with his better after contact average, Henry will have a distinct advantage over this season. There's sufficient evidence to support this too, as over the last 5 seasons, Derrick Henry has averaged 2.1 yards before contact and 2.5 yards after contact. Over that same span, Edwards has averaged 2.5 yards before contact and 2.3 after contact. The idea that Derrick Henry could get more out of each run would not only change how defensives game plan against the Ravens, but also Derrick Henry's usage throughout the season. But now we're finally going to get to Derrick Henry's projections in the Ravens offense for 2024. Last year with the Tennessee Titans, he ran the ball 280 times for 1,167 yards and 12 touchdowns. In 2024, I believe Derrick Henry will be between 200 to 230 rushing attempts for 1,200 to 1,500 yards and 12 to 15 touchdowns. As I stated before, Derrick Henry has never had the benefit of a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, and likewise, Lamar has never had a running back like Derrick Henry. We simply don't know what the results of that relationship will be. There is a chance it may be underwhelming if their styles don't mesh well. Compounding talent doesn't always work in the NFL. At the same time, I think it would be a surprise to no one to see Lamar and Henry exceed even the expectations that I've put on them for this season. I guess the point is, we're just going to have to wait and see when the season arrives. In the next few weeks, I'm going to be putting out a separate video specifically discussing the relationship between Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, so be on the lookout for that. Now, I know I've spent perhaps too much time focusing on Derrick Henry in this video, but don't think that I forgot the other running backs on this team. Justice Hill last year had a bit of a renaissance with regard to his usage and playmaking ability. After getting hurt alongside J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards before the 2021 season got started, Justice Hill has mysteriously seemed to come back even stronger and with more explosiveness than before. I don't know if he's actually faster or simply more decisive with his runs, but the difference is beyond noticeable. Last year for the Ravens, Gus Edwards was the hammer, Lamar Jackson was the knife, and Keaton Mitchell was the lightning. Justice Hill was both none of these and all of these at the same time for the Ravens offense. While there were, of course, inconsistencies throughout the season, the back half of the Ravens' schedule was filled with Justice Hill highlights, and his playmaking ability was on full display. Need Justice Hill to take the ball up the gut? Okay, he can do that. Need him to bounce it outside with one cut? Okay, yeah, he can do that too. Need him to stay in on third down and block a pass rusher for Lamar? He was the best that we had at that last season. Or do you want him to swing out wide and catch a pass from Lamar for what seems to be a first down almost every time? Yeah, we know he can do that. As we're talking about Justice Hill's offensive skills that he brings to the table, we aren't going to get into his special teams play, which is also a huge reason the Ravens love having Justice Hill on the roster. Last year, my offensive projections for Justice Hill were 300 to 400 yards rushing, 200 to 300 yards receiving, 1 to 2 rushing touchdowns, and 1 to 2 receiving touchdowns. His final stats for the 2023 season were 387 yards rushing on 84 attempts, 28 passes caught for 206 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, and 1 magnificent receiving touchdown in the Miami game. Now, I'm not one to gloat, but I think this is probably the best projection accuracy that I've had. It's difficult to say what Justice Hill is going to give the Ravens this year, as we aren't sure what the Ravens will ask of Justice Hill in 2024. No, I'm not going to bring up Derrick Henry again, but even 84 attempts for Justice Hill might be a big ask this year. I definitely still think he's going to be involved with the receiving game and special teams. But now let's get into my projections for Justice Hill for 2024. In his last 3 full seasons, he's averaging 63.6 attempts per season, and during that time, his rushing yards averaged 291.3 yards per season. His touchdowns, they're irregular, so I didn't average those together, with 2 in his first year, none in his next 2, and then 3 last year. Taking all of that into consideration, my projections for Justice Hill are 50 to 70 rushing attempts for 300 to 400 yards and 1 to 3 touchdowns, 30 to 40 targets and 20 to 30 receptions for 200 to 300 receiving yards and 1 to 3 receiving touchdowns. I think Justice Hill is still going to be an essential cog in the Ravens offense for the 2024 season, considering he knows the playbook better than Henry, he's been able to consistently produce when being called upon, and with Rasheen Ali and Keaton Mitchell coming back from injuries, he should have a head start for the RB2 position early in the season. But now, speaking of Rasheen Ali and Keaton Mitchell, their offensive projections are much more difficult. Ali is a rookie coming off of a torn bicep into a Ravens team that just signed Derrick Henry, and he has a significant fumbling issue. Not trying to say he's starting out on the back foot, but I would be shocked to see him getting more snaps than Justice Hill in the early part of the season. I would like to do a proper breakdown for Ali, but with the situation he's coming into being so full of unknowns, not least of which is the fact that he hasn't taken a snap yet in the NFL, I think I'll play it on the safe side here and give some running back 3 numbers for him just to be on the lookout for. My projection for him is going to be 30 to 40 rushing attempts, 100 to 200 rushing yards, 0 to 2 touchdowns, 10 to 15 targets, 50 to 100 receiving yards, and 0 to 1 receiving touchdowns. Even as I read it, it sounds harsh, but the reality of the situation is that we're asking the coaches who would they rather see getting snaps in this offense right now, Derrick Henry or Rasheen Ali. Well, you as Ravens fans should be able to answer that yourselves. Last but not least, we're going to do a projection for Keaton Mitchell. Not because it makes sense or because we have enough data that I think I can accurately project it. I just don't want to leave him out. He's too much fun. He has a great spark to him and both on and off the field, and I still think he can do great things for us this season if he comes back from his injury looking even 90 to 95% of what he showed us last year. Speaking of last year, in the limited attempts and games we saw Keaton Mitchell in, his numbers were ridiculous. I know many of you were probably reacting the same way that I did watching him break out in that Seattle game. In 2023, Keaton Mitchell had 47 rushing attempts and 396 yards to go along with 2 touchdowns. I'll save you the calculations, but he was averaging 8.4 yards per carry. Sure, it's a small sample size, but you can't deny the talent nor the speed that he displayed. The stat sheet will tell you that he played in 8 games, but all of his rushing attempts were over a 6-game span, meaning he did all of that in only 6 games. Now, the tricky part, of course, with projecting the final stats in 2024 for Keaton is simply the fact that we don't know when he's going to return to the roster, and even when he does return, we have no idea how much volume he's even going to get. As far as anyone's best guess as to when he's going to return, most people think it's going to be probably October or November. With him officially being on the physically unable to perform list or PUP list, he will definitely be out for all of September. But just so we have something to go on, I'm going to give him an arbitrary return date of Sunday, November 3rd. It's a 1 o'clock game against the Denver Broncos in Baltimore. The reason I picked this is not only because it fits with the timeline of his return, but also because the expectations for the Denver Broncos this year aren't insanely high, and with our current running back roster, I think Mitchell could get some snaps in without too much pressure on him to perform. Now, there's no easy teams in the NFL that are pushovers, but this could be a safe place for him to start, and with it being 4 games before our bye week, it should give the coaches and Mitchell himself a decent look at where he's at health-wise, as well as what sort of workload he can handle. Now, this year's running back room is more talented than last year's, and if Mitchell is going to miss the first 2 months of the season, I don't actually see him getting an extensive amount of work. With Mitchell on a rookie deal and Derrick Henry locked up for the next 2 years, the Ravens are going to play this smart, and unless there's an injury to someone ahead of them, Mitchell's numbers probably aren't going to be as crazy as some of you might think. For the 9 games that Mitchell will play in, my final projections for his stats are 30 to 40 attempts, 200 to 300 yards, 1 to 3 rushing touchdowns, 10 to 15 targets, 5 to 10 receptions for 50 to 100 receiving yards, and 0 to 2 receiving touchdowns. Now, like I said, it seems underwhelming given what Mitchell has shown us, but we know that John Harbaugh has tended to stay on the safe side over the past few years when it comes to injuries to his breakout and star players. Now, obviously, these things can change during the season depending on injuries and how well the team is doing, but I think the Ravens are actually pretty set at the running back position going into the season. Well, everyone, I know this was a long one compared to the wide receiver and tight end video, but I appreciate you sticking with me, as I believe this season has the potential to be one of the most exciting ones when it comes to Baltimore Ravens running backs. If you enjoyed the video, please leave it a like, subscribe if you're new around here, and don't forget to comment down below what your expectations are for the running backs of Baltimore in 2024. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, stay safe out there and go Ravens.